And so I began to plan ways or things that I could say to defend myself and to bring the truth out. But the Lord said, no, don't do it. The Lord just told me to take what was happening. And He didn't say, suck it up, buttercup, or anything like that. But He did instruct me to not rush to my own defense and to just let things land where they fell. So to me, it was like the Lord telling me to take the blame. Now, this was not a huge ordeal. It turned out, everything turned out okay. Situation worked out, but I didn't like the approach because I like to defend myself, and I usually will. And so I was just really telling the Lord about this because I didn't disobey Him so much, but I didn't like it. And I was telling Him all about it, how I felt, when He distinctly said to me in one of the fewer times that He has actually spoken in that internally audible voice. I hope that you've had that happen at least once, but if not, you keep seeking Him and it probably will someday. But that internally audible voice said to me, now you know how I felt. Well, that stopped me in my tracks. And I remembered this verse from Romans 8. The Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs also, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. And here's the part that really stood out to me. If indeed we suffer with Him, so that we may also be glorified with Him. Did you catch that? Suffer with Him. Now, I believe that any kind of suffering, whether physical or emotional, can be experienced with Jesus. And it all counts. It all works out for our good eventually. If I have a harsh disease and I suffer, I can know that Jesus is with me in my suffering. He enters it with me, and that's super meaningful to me. So if you've got a harsh disease or something that's really been plaguing you in that way, Jesus is not up there saying, oh well, no skin off my nose. He's not doing that. He's entering that with you. He enters that and goes through that, and that to me is so precious. It's very meaningful to me that when we have that kind of suffering, that we can know that He's with us. And I believe that every person who goes through suffering, which is all of us sooner or later, that we make a choice if this suffering will be with Jesus or not with Jesus. That's a choice that we make. The people who choose not with Jesus, those are the people who really get bitter and whose experience just seems to go from bad to worst. The words we might use to describe this might be Christ suffering with us. Christ entering our suffering, because it's our suffering and He's entering with it and going through it with us. And so I know that if I'm suffering, He's suffering too because of that. But what if we put it in the biblical language here and says, what if indeed we suffer with Him? As opposed to Him entering our sufferings, we enter into His sufferings. If you have ever been discriminated against you because of your faith, you have entered into His suffering. People who suffer the death of martyrs, they enter into the experience of Christ's sufferings because He's the one that had that first. He was beaten and killed and mocked and had a crown of thorns smashed on His head and nailed to a cross, spit on, and just all kinds of abuse that He took during the time He was here. That was why He came to the earth. That was His suffering. But sometimes we are called upon to enter into that suffering with Him. So if you've ever been discriminated against, if you have entered into the suffering of Christ. Jesus took a whole lot of blame that He didn't deserve.